So anyway, just to introduce myself, my name is Deborah Cohen. I worked for the BBC for a long time, making radio programmes, mostly for TV, on science and technology and medicine. I'm now doing a PhD as a kind of retirement project on the history of mental health, actually, on radio. But I'm also very interested in local history. And Janet here, of course, who does amazing things with the Hackney History Festival, which you all know about, has twisted my arm to come and talked last year and to talk now a bit about this. So anyway, the Parkesine Factory, this is like going back a century before when, when the architecture firms started. So this is a photo which is not from 1866, but it's still sort of from the time of lots of industry, of what was going on here. So there was a factory here between 1866 and only 1868 in which the very first plastic was made. And it's a sad story of industrial development not going right. But the man who was behind this, as you probably know, as you can see, there's a plaque outside, was a man called Alexander Parkes, who was born in Birmingham. He was many things, but what he wasn't was trained as a chemist at all. He's described himself as an artist, a chemist, a metallurgist. And he basically, at the end of his life, actually took out, I think 66, but I actually saw somewhere something like 80 patents on various industrial processes. But as it turned out, he was not very good at business. But so he learned his skills actually as he was apprenticed to a company in a metallurgy company in Birmingham, which is where he learned the skills. But he was the kind of person who just dreamt up lots and lots of ideas. This is him. He doesn't look, he looks like a kind of Victorian gentleman, doesn't he? Rather than someone who would get his hands dirty making things. But I think he did do some of the making himself. So the thing that he's best known for, and what this factory is known for, is called Parkesine, which was one of the first plastics. These are some pictures of objects that were made by from Parkesine that you can see. If you look on the Science Museum website, you can find pictures of these. Sadly, you can't see them in the flesh, because as we'll discover, they kind of rot away as soon as they're exposed to the sunlight. So unfortunately, they're not, you can't actually look at them. I have just checked that today, because actually, as I'll show you later, my daughter, who works at the Science Museum as a curator, curated a little exhibition to celebrate Alexander Parkes' 200 years since his 200th anniversary, where they did show some of them in a very, very, very carefully environmentally controlled case at the Science Museum. But I just checked with her and she said, no, none of them are on show. They're all kept in very, very carefully controlled environments. So these are some of them, but it's just they were made because he just kind of hit lucky that this was the time when there was a kind of booming middle class who basically wanted to have all those lovely things that you could get in ivory or mahogany or tortoiseshell, but actually wanted the cheap and cheerful versions. They wanted the kind of Primark versions of Armani, so to speak, that kind of thing. So people really, really wanted to spend a small amount of money on a trinket, really, or a hair comb. What I remember from the exhibition was those beautiful tortoiseshell hair combs that women had in that time, but made of Parkesine. And this one was actually even attempted to make something that would work in a machine. But actually, if it was ever in a machine, it would probably set the machine on alight because it was basically very unstable. So basically he managed to get money. He got quite a lot of investment to start his factory here, but ultimately he couldn't sell them. He also had very high principles apparently, and he didn't want to sell things to people he didn't like or people whose views he didn't like. So he was a hopeless businessman, it seemed to me. So after 2 years it kind of went bust. But what happened was that his Daniel Spill and his brother both worked for Parkesine, for Alexander Parkes. He was the office manager or the general manager, and he was obviously a much better businessman and actually took over the patents and managed to make them work. He must have tweaked them in some way so that people actually, so that these objects didn't rot away in quite the same way, and set up what was called Ivoride Works in Homerton High Street. Hard to imagine. I looked up where this is. This is just sort of opposite the church that then behind which is the hospital. So it was on that the south side of Homerton High Street. Quite hard to imagine where this, that it would look like that then. Anyway, he made quite a success of it. He also created something called Xylolite, which was also very similar. Managed to make a going of it. So the factory was too small, and he moved to Walthamstow in the 90s and moved some of the manufacture out to Essex as well. And he did quite well out of it. So it was the beginning of the kind of formation of contemporary plastics industry. But of course, someone's got to start. So I think we can probably say that Alexander Parks was one of the pioneers, even though he didn't actually make it all work. And, he didn't make a lot of money out of it. So the other interesting thing is, why did he open his factory in Hackney Wick, you might ask? Because he was based in Birmingham. In fact, he never lived in this side of London. He'd also worked in Wales for a while when they were developing their industrial processes. But the reason being, it seems, after there's a woman called Juliet Davis who's written quite a lot about the development of this area. She's an architect, academic architect at Cardiff University. And she says what was happening was at this time in the 19th century, of course, London was expanding as there was more and more industry. And Hackney Wick this area was perfectly positioned between the railway line was already there, and the canals. So there was brilliant access to actually get your products out to the markets that you wanted to get them to. So it seemed to make more sense for him to build the factory there. Why exactly he came here, I don't know the details. I haven't managed to find that out, but somebody might know. Yes?
What is the raw material that goes into making that?
It apparently was made from gun cotton. So gun cottons, so it's cellulose nitrate. I wasn't going to go into the chemistry of it, but there's quite a lot written about the chemistry. So it was the kind of originator of celluloid, and as you know, the early film stock is very flammable as well. So that's also an extremely dangerous thing to have around. But of course, there was no health and safety in those days, apparently. But it also was incredibly polluted, as you might expect. Because apart from these sort of factories that obviously belched out lots of horrible things, there were a lot of abattoirs and various other things that you don't really want to think about that were contaminating the River Lee, which was in a terrible state at this time. You probably wouldn't have wanted to live around here. So, on that. Anyway, that's what I'm just going to be asked to talk very briefly about it, but that's sort of what happened and why this place is so extraordinary. It's brilliant that it still survives, given the rest of all the development here. So I guess we have to thank Hackney Council, Hackney Society for creating this as a conservation area. Anyway, I'll just finish with a funny picture. This is the picture of my daughter in 2013 when she was young. She's not quite so young now. Standing next to the Parkesine sign and all these things, which are apparently, I haven't actually noticed them, apparently still somewhere down near where the chemical symbols are, down by Hackney Wick Station. But I didn't notice it when I walked up today, so it might have gone actually. Though she said it did used to be there, because I thought it might be around here. But I must say, every time I come here, which is into this area, it's different. It changes so rapidly, it's hard to imagine. I can remember the days when it was, there were lots of artists living here, and everywhere, everything was an old warehouse. There was nothing new at all here, but that's going back quite a long time now. Anyway, thank you very much. That's what I thought I'd give you a sort of contrast to the lovely modern things, the exciting new architectural things that are being done here now.